Hello coaches and welcome to this presentation on the 1-4-4-2 in the series 11 versus 11 formations and systems of play. And today we are pleased to introduce Paul Marco, the men's coach at Binghampton University and also a member of United Soccer Coaches National Staff. Hello Paul.
Hi David, how are you?
Very good, thank you. And also joining us today is Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching Education for United Soccer Coaches. Hi Ian.
Hi David, it's a pleasure to be here with yourself and Coach Marco.
So Paul, we're going to start off straight away talking about the overview of this presentation, and as with all the other presentations in this series, we're going to follow a very similar format, starting off talking about the general formation, how that formation then morphs into the system, talking about things such as the numbering that we're using specific to the 1-4-4-2, and then talking about some of the attacking and defending principles of play and as they relate to some of the activities that you may use to teach this formation and system. So let's talk straight away about the numbering and basic shape, and we're going to start with the attacking shape for your 1-4-4-2.
Great, thanks David. So we'll first look at the goalkeeper, the number 1. You can see here clearly defined, usually in a different color kit, but this is the goalkeeper, the player who can use their hands on the field, playing behind our back 4. We then look at the back 4, starting with the right back, the number 2, with 2 center backs, the number 4 and the number 5, and then our left back, the number 3. We would really like to have a left-footed number 3 in this system. The next is the holding midfield player, our defensive midfield player, the screening player, our number 6. We only have 1 holding midfielder in this shape of a 4-4-2 diamond. And then we have 2 inside right and inside left midfield players. The number 8s, we have 2 of them. So 1 holding midfielder, 2 linking midfielders, a left inside and a right inside. With 1 attacking midfielder, 1 number 10 in the diamond, playing at the top just underneath the strikers. And then 2 twin strikers, 2 9s. They can complement each other. We'll talk a little bit more about them as we go on, but the 2 9s, one could be big, one could be small, but they are a pair and they hunt for goals together. So here you see the complete team, the goalkeeper through the back 4 with 1 6, 1 8, a 7 and an 11. And then 2 players up front. This would be more of a flat 4 in midfield than a diamond. So just another shape out of the 4-4-2. This shape would be more of a goalkeeper that you can see clearly, 4 back players, 2 6s and 2 8/2 10s and 2 9s. This would be more of a box in midfield that you kind of see right here. All different shapes in a 4-4-2. So this now starts to talk about the shape of the group when we're starting to attack. You can now clearly see that the 2 has gotten ahead of the backs and the 3 has gotten ahead of the 2 center backs who are home to protect, with a number 6 sitting just in front of them to help protect. So there's 3 players back here. So the left and right backs have advanced their positions to provide the width in the team. The 2 8s are in the half spaces here with our 10 in between them, and our 2 9s have moved centrally as we move closer towards the goal. This clip is showing the defensive shape and structure that we would see as our 9 is now picking up one of the fullbacks. This player now would move wide to help defend this space. The other 9 would stay wide as well, resisting to come and press the center backs that you'd see in here, but it's showing that we have 2 split strikers.
When I look at this one, Paul, it looks like this is based off of your diamond formation, so that your four midfielders are all pretty tight in the center. And what you've apparently got is you've got your number nines working across the line to put pressure on. So when you take away the 7 and 11, I assume in your system or your interpretation with the diamond, you're asking your number nines to do a bit of defending from high up.
Yes, correct, Ian. We're asking the nines to defend against their 2 and their 3. They're 2 wide backs, so they'll have responsibility to pick up players that will try to advance in these spaces. Our 2 and our 3 will be picking up their wide midfielders or their wingers. Here you can see that in this defensive shape, our 9 has picked up the outside player, but it's the 8s that now are helping out. And this is where we start to see the 9 may have to track on this side, the weak side, all the way back. And if you watched Portugal in the last Euros, you saw 2 famous soccer players, Ronaldo and Nani, as the 2 players that played up front as the 9s, and they were tracking players all the way deep. In fact, sometimes a 9 will track a player very deep into this area of the field. In this picture, you see the 8s. In most places, we would want this 8 here. Some people have them drop in. I'm going to ask this 8 to step forward. And this 8 will sit in this pocket right here, this whole space right here that you see. And the reason why is with the 10 now maybe coming to a center back, the 8 will now move in and help pick up the holding midfield player of our opponent in that space there.
One of the key things I see on that slide, David, if you could just go back, is how compact Paul's unit is with the diamond midfield, 1, 2, 3, and 4. They've got the diamond midfield, but the number 9s have pinched in, and also the 2 and the 3. So in terms of principles of defending, team defending, compactness, it's a really nice visual of how the team can get really small out of possession.
Yeah, and the place that we give away to the opponent is out here on the flank, and especially on the weak side, we'll squeeze everybody, and we have a lot of numbers through the middle of the team here, as you can see.
So, Paul, we've now given a brief overview of the 1-4-4-2 system as it relates to the diamond, both attacking and defending. So let's talk about some of the features and the reasons why you've chosen this formation over others.
That sounds great. So one of them that we just mentioned, but you can see it here clearly, is we outnumber opponents in the middle of the field. So if you play in a 4-4-2 and you play with wide midfield players, such as a 7 and an 11, we outnumber you now centrally. Could be 2 against our 4 or 3 against our 4. And in this picture, you can clearly see that we outnumber you centrally with all of our players here in this diamond. So our 4 central midfield players will outnumber a 3 system, a 3-man system, 1 6 and 2 10s, a 6, an 8, and a 10 centrally in the vital area of the field. So we're going to leave the center backs for our opponent on the ball. And by our 9s moving wider to defend, it then gives us some space to play. So our 9s are on the outside shoulders, as you can see, of their 2 center backs, allowing space centrally for our 10 to operate in. Very rarely do the wide players of the opponents, the 2 and the 3, drop deeper behind center backs to help cover. So there'll be no cover for the 2 center backs we're playing against with our number 9s on the outside shoulders of those 2 players.
What I really like is this notion of these 9s getting in between the fullbacks and the centre backs, because that's really difficult for centre backs who think they're going to be marking the 9s. And because of that diamond having the 10 as the point, you start to get 3 players really engaging the back 4 of the opponent. But the key is that these number 9s are mobile and shifting around. They're not just standing in one place. But I think that visual you've created there, David, really captures that concept nicely.
And to add to that, just if you look here, so the view of this number 5, the opponent, if the 10 has the ball, they can't see the 9 off the blind shoulder. So she'll have to readjust her position. She'll have to try to play the player off. So by being on the blind side shoulder over in this area, this 9 now makes this 5 make a decision. If the 9 came in here and played in front, well then, yeah, we might be able to have clear possession with a pass in front, but we then didn't get behind them. So we're now having a harder time to penetrate them. By taking up starting positions on the outside shoulders, it now gives the opponent a new challenge, a difficult challenge, one where they can't see the ball and the team and the player they're playing against at the same time. So by asking our wide backs, our fullbacks, to take up higher positions, it now presents a new problem. Rarely do the fullbacks of the opponents like to have really high starting positions. So we may get a little more freedom and time on the ball here as we join late. Who's going to now pick this player up? It could end up being one of the central midfielders that comes out to try to pick up our fullback. Or it will be their fullback trying to engage very high, leaving this space over here for the 9 or the 10 to occupy. So it gives the opponent a choice that they might not be very comfortable making, because we didn't just line up player for player against them, meaning we didn't put a player to just go play against their 3 or their 2 outside backs. So this is an area that we see as a strength that also helps us start to counterattack. So in midfield, we see the weak side 8 moving higher up the field. Instead of dropping deeper, you can see this player is now moved into this position to perhaps help with their holding midfield player. Remember, this 9 might have to track this player over here, depending on if they advance their fullback into those positions. So this 9 right here on the weak side might have to track back, which allows our 8 to then push forward. And now as soon as we win the ball, we have 2 players now to possibly counterattack through centrally, where we would have only had 1 if we had this weak side 8 drop back into this space.
It occurs to me, Paul, that for a youth coach, maybe just having the 4 midfielders flat across the field with left, right, left center, and right center responsibilities would be much easier for a youth player to grasp right away. It occurs to me that this diamond shape that you've established does require a lot of free thinking as the game is going, because the roles aren't as clearly defined.
That would be correct, Ian. And the challenge that we see when we see these lines, these 2 blocks of 4 making 8 players, a block of 8, is this space in between them. And the diamond really takes care of that by putting players in between these areas. And that's the strength of the diamond, is that you have more depth between players. The challenge for us now is to figure out who goes where, when, and why. And we've decided that we're going to move our 8 on the weak side forward to help pick up another perhaps holding midfielder. So if they played with 2 6s, you could see that our 10 might have a hard time getting out of it. Another way to solve it would be to drop the 9 into this space and have this 8 drop deeper. The challenge I have with that is that now we're asking an 8, a central midfielder, to drop deeper. If the 9 is back in this space, remember, now we can counter with a long pass here diagonally into a free space, because their fullback is advancing. That's why our 9 has picked them up. So I really like this, that it allows us to have some depth between players. And by moving that 8 forward on the weak side, it allows us another player to help counterattack through. So when our 9s move wide, and you can see that they've drifted now to pick up the wide backs, it allows us now to have these 4 midfield players in these spaces to then help create more compactness centrally, outnumber the opponent centrally, and it allows us to have players who are in positions to help counterattack. And our then strikers are joining late, getting on the ball with space to run with the ball. That perhaps is a key that sometimes we lose sight of. I mean, imagine Ronaldo tracking back here. The ball is now 1 over here, and now the ball is played diagonally to Ronaldo, who has 25 or 30 yards of space to run at a center back.
Okay, so Paul, now we're going to talk about how we are applying the principles of attack and defense to the team and the methodology of coaching in the game. So let's talk firstly about the attacking principles.
So here you can see the principles of attack. We'll teach the team how to penetrate. We'll teach them what support is, and also include depth, vertical space between players. Mobility, a very difficult principle to teach, perhaps. We'll show how we can try to unbalance the opponent. Width, who will provide it, where and when. And then, of course, showing some improvisation, some creativity and surprise. We'll try and get that off of the two strikers. So the first, vertical possession by beating layers of players. I'd like to just mention this one word, this agitator. For me, the three players that are involved with things, so the number 4 right here has the ball. The number 3 can drift into this space, try to pull out this opponent right here, which now will allow the 9 to get on the ball. So we would consider this wide player perhaps as the agitator trying to help the 9 get on the ball. And this is allowing us to beat players. So you can clearly see that we've beaten this layer of player and this layer of player with a pass that goes into this space. If our fullback can join late, perhaps the 9 would be the one that would be the agitator to show into this space. Maybe the ball can be played into here, into our 3.
And what I also see is, David, if we could go back, is that because the midfield is narrow, there is a passing channel from a deep position here straight forward. There's a straight passing channel because there's not midfielders in the way. So this vertical pass from a defender into a checking number 9 bypasses our own midfield and now leaves them in support positions facing the right way. So the narrowness of the diamond can allow us this vertical passing type opportunity in the way that Paul's got this particular group of players lined up.
Correct. And Ian, you mentioned just now that they're facing forward. So we hear a lot of coaches use the term play the way that you face. And if we had the ball here and now the ball is played into here, this player is clearly facing backwards perhaps. But we'd like to try to teach players to face the way they would like to play. So when you receive the ball, could you be facing the way that you want to go before you get on the ball? And in this particular instance, because we have some vertical space here, some depth between players, these two players, now the ball can be played backwards and then look to be playing forward again. So yeah, I really like this. It's a strength where we are trying to play into target players and then down into players who are facing forward, looking perhaps to get players into advanced positions with the next pass into those spaces. So because we are now looking to play perhaps in behind, so we beat opponents by playing through them, by playing around them, and by playing over them. This particular picture shows us that by having players inside, it might give us what one of our friends, Nathan Williams, would be an A pass, a ball that's going to beat all the layers of players directly in behind that our number 9 would now be running onto. So you can see that 1-9 engages the fullback and brings them inside, and the other 9 can now run in behind them. This run allows for vertical space between these two players, depth between the two strikers, something that's vital to our success. So the movement of our 10. So let's say that the ball has now come into this space here. We have our fullback that will overlap. The 9s could show one perhaps short, one perhaps long, bringing these two center backs out of the equation with now a blind side, weak side run because our 3 has gone up to engage their player, leaving our 10 wide open for a run in behind. Unbalancing the opponent, this would be a run of mobility right here. We're going to ask our 2 and our 3, our 2 fullbacks, to provide the width in the team. This will be a challenge for them, as we're going to ask them to play from perhaps one end line to the other end line. So in this particular system, the two wide backs will have to have very good levels of fitness. The strikers will help in build-up play by staying central and maybe even occasionally having to move into wide positions depending on where the ball is. But as we get closer to the goal, we'd really not like our nines to be running out into these spaces. We'd like our nines to be in spaces where they can score goals.
Paul, can you talk a little bit about the value and importance of the seemingly unheralded number 6 in allowing 3 and 2 the freedom to get forward, and the value of that number 6?
Well, this number 6, you know, a lot of times the holding player doesn't like to hold. They like to go and support play. But this player is really here to allow the wide players to move on. They act as a pivot to now get on the ball and change the point of attack. They act as a helping player to the two center backs that you can see, this triangle right here. So they really are protecting the center backs, stopping counterattack. So the ball is lost here, and this player now will be in that position to help stop the counterattack. But the 6 is vital to be the pivot player to help and support behind as an escape from the wide players. So this is another area that we can see some creativity in that if we can get some depth, some vertical space between the two nines, we can now start to drag the two center backs out of position where they might not be able to cover each other. So if the ball is here with the 8 and it's going to slide into this 9, it's going to now be, perhaps we can see another run into this space. So the starting position of this 9 here was here. You can see this dotted line where they're now running. So this 9 starts here, and now as the ball travels into this space, it passes by this 9 where this player was now tight, allowing now a run to be bent in behind into this space. If the center back doesn't go with the player and they're now loose, free in here, they could receive the ball and turn and face the goal. This player is now free. Maybe they now, as they've shown into this space for the ball, they now turn and run in this way and now go play 2 against this center back. So we can now see if there is some vertical space where you're seeing right here between the two strikers, we can now really start to unbalance the two center backs and not let them be happy by covering for each other.
Paul, now we're going to talk about some of the activities you've chosen to help to train your team with the principles of play, looking at attacking first.
So this is a normal diamond passing activity that many coaches have done. I've just added a few wrinkles into it. So this here is just, you can see it clearly. You just pass the ball and you would pass the ball and you would follow your pass. You would follow your pass. So some of the wrinkles that I've added to it is perhaps maybe there's a little combination where the ball is now being played in, played back, played through, or played into a 1-2. I've put 2 players at some of the wall dummies where now you can see that there might be some combination play here between 2 players. So perhaps these are 2 center backs. As the ball travels into one of them, the other one takes up their position deeper than square, allowing the ball to be played and then driven into the next player. This could be where they stay at their flag area, and now they're playing, and this would be a wide midfield player receiving sideways on to now play into maybe a striking player, or again to a back player who would then look to then play out the other way. So this is an area where maybe we're seeing some more combination play, and we're now maybe see some visual cues. So we're now starting to talk about all the different qualities and the spin of the ball, the accuracy. We're talking about the weight of the pass. So this ball into here is a little different than this ball into here. Perhaps this is with the outside of my left foot spinning the ball into him. Notice the run here, you spin out away. You're trying to get the opponent to come with you tight. So then this space over here is allowed freely for now you to operate. So you're giving them a 1-2. This angle here probably needs to be a little bit more inside to allow the ball to be played to beat the opponent. You know, if the ball comes being played straight back, now there's really no space. There's no angle to play it into. So we can start to look at all of the various qualities of passing as well as the movement off the ball. This one starts to add visual cues. So what I've done is I've taken a basic diamond pattern and I've now started to use choices. So this player here, you can see maybe the hand is up, or a hand would be pointing out, or a hand would be pointing down to show the ball. When the ball is traveling into here, this player is now making a decision based on what they saw from this player, whether the ball is going to get played here, whether the ball is going to get played into the goal, which would be an overlapping player in the game making this run, or if the ball is going to get bounced back to this player. So this player is now making decisions, just like the game, on the visual cues that they're reading from this player, having 3 choices now to play a ball. Something that we need to spend a lot more time on are visual cues with our players, reading body language of players, reading what's available, reading advantage space. I'll quickly mention advantage space. So if you can see this area here, so this player here, if there's an opponent standing here, has the advantage for this ball coming in to any ball that is played on this side of the line. The player that is in this space right here has the advantage to any ball that is played past that line. So if this ball now comes to here, the opponent would have the advantage to the ball. As the space gets bigger, so a ball that might be played in deep. So I'll show it to you in here. So this red player is playing the ball into this player. If the ball gets played all the way over into this space, this blue player will have advantage to that space, depending on how fast this player is. So advantage space is the space that the player that you're trying to play the ball to has the advantage to. Sometimes it could be back to goal defending and attacking. So if there's a player standing right here and the red team is going this way, this player now has advantage to every ball that is played short of that line. If this player now plays the ball into here, the opponent would now have the advantage to the space to get the ball into those spaces. So advantage space also comes out into this diamond passing pattern that we put in. This is a very simple activity that is a lot of hard work. So basically it's 4 against 4 inside the space with our diamond players, our 6, 2 8s, and a 10, playing against 4 players as an opponent. They could be in a box, they could be in flat, they could be in a diamond as well. One of the things I really like about this activity is that we have targets to play to. So the blue team is trying to go this way to a target. So the ball starts by being played across to the 5, functionally now into a 6 or into an 8, and they're trying to now penetrate. So now the ball goes played into our 9. Our 9 would then play the ball across, and now they would play into the blue team that is now trying to, or the white team that is now trying to go the other way. So the game can be played both directions, or I can have it go both directions to where winners keep the ball. So it goes into the 5, down to an 8, back, and then in. Even played across, and then I could have the blue team keep possession and now go the other way, or I could then let them play in. I like this here because it recycles the game. It gives all the players on the inside enough time to recycle their runs and get ready for a new ball coming in, showing timing of their movement. As this ball is traveling, the attacking group is now getting ready. The defending group is now getting ready for the ball being played in by the 9.
One of the things that I liked about that activity is, and the way I would probably play is I would make the blue team my focus because I've got them in the orientation I'd like to have them in the game. So I've got my 10 high and my 6 deeper. I've also got my 4 and 5 behind the play and my targets high. So the way I would do this session typically, especially with some senior players, is make it a blue team focused activity and reset each time with the blue team going that way. Make it take it, where the blues can go back and forth and or the whites can, is perfectly fine. But as Paul is starting to get this functional training going, I like to keep the 6 oriented behind the 2 8s and the 10 high. So that would just be a potential interpretation if you're working with some players who really know their roles and you want to get them lots of reps.
One quick thing about this, if we put in a dotted line here and a dotted line here, it could then start to become the half spaces where the 8s would operate. So we would want the 6 to sit a little deeper, like Ian was saying about punctuality in this session. We could then put those little mini goals that we had over in here, and now perhaps when the ball was played into an 8 in this half space, they could now penetrate with a ball into the goal area. We would automatically have a supply of balls being restarted here, or they could try to penetrate into the other space for a 9 now into those spaces just across this zone. I really like this activity. We spend a lot of time in this activity, building it up to actually going to goals where we would set goals down in this space and perhaps still just have balls down here where now the game is continually going in one direction, allowing the Blues to counterattack, perhaps playing to a target into this space. What you're starting to see here, you can advance the slide one more. This is just showing us what we just talked about. And now you can start to really see that this is allowing the counterattack to happen. So the Blues have won it, and now they immediately now have to defend as the ball was played across and then in. Now the Blues are now starting to show a defending side to the game as well. So now the Blues had the ball, they've lost the ball or scored the goal, and now it turns over, and now can they immediately transition to defending. So now we're going to see it a little bit more functionally, where we now start to look at some build-up play for the Blues. We put our 2 9s high as the targets. If the opponent comes and tries to press us, so they've now picked us up player for player, I think in the game we would just ask our goalkeeper to perhaps play it long first. That would then get the opponent to perhaps drop off, or would get us a lot of good chances to score goals perhaps. So what we'll see here is we're able to build out. We've asked our 2 to take up a wider position. They probably even need to get even wider in here to separate the white players to allow our 8s to get onto the ball. So we're going to see now where perhaps our 6 may have to drop deeper into the team. Maybe as the players are now starting to move the 6 as the ball gets played wide and the 4 would slide over, the 6 may drop back into the team because we're asking our 2 and our 3 to both get higher in the team. We are asking the 6 to be the pivot player to help change the point of attack and to help spray balls vertically forward into all different types of positions, where you're now starting to see the real vision of this player here. They have to be able to play in 360 degrees. They have to be able to keep a first touch close to them and be able to have a good range of passing. As we now start to bring in more players, we're now starting to look at what happens after we now get the ball in advance. We now would then look to try and get players in advanced positions to support the number 9s as they now get the ball at the halfway line. I don't know if we spend enough time with our 9s, with our strikers, receiving balls at the halfway line. One of those examples is, have you ever been playing in your team, all of a sudden the balls come down this flank, your right back has won the ball, and they've played it up into this space where their left back has now got the ball and they're coming back at you because your striker was over here watching play and not getting into position in case we won the ball. So we would ask our 9, even when the ball is going at our goal, to start to take up good positions in case we win it. Can you be the outlet and support for us to keep possession?
Paul, thanks. Let's now look at the defending side of the game, and we're going to look at, firstly, the defending principles of play as they pertain to the 1-4-4-2.
So we'll look at pressure, the role of the player closest to the ball defending, the covering player perhaps behind the ball, usually at a 45-degree angle. We'll explain that. The balancing players that are away from the ball, trying to help balance the team in case the ball couldn't get switched, and stopping players from perhaps unbalancing us by running in behind us. The compactness in the team, and that both goes vertically, the space between our backs to our strikers, vertically as well as across the field, and that would be really from our 2 9s when they split, and our 2 and our 3, our 2 outside backs. And then individually having the patience and the discipline and a restraint, and perhaps even a restraining line that we will drop off, and we'll talk about that as well. So one of the key positions for us is going to be the weak side 8. And we mentioned it earlier, but now you can clearly see it. So we want to stop them from changing the point of attack. So you can clearly see here's our 3 and our 2 picking up players. And it looks like they've started to deploy a lot of players forward. What we have to really do is we have to take care of our 8, this player right here. So they're going to move to stop midfield players from getting on it and penetrating. Again, this number here, this should be a 9 right here, where our 9 is dropped back into this space. This will be our 10 right here instead of our 9, just those 2 wrinkles to change. And then that's our 8 stepping forward. A lot of coaches like to bring the 8 back into this space to help protect. But as you can see, the 6 is already dealing with a player. And they don't have any other players deployed forward. So we really need to stop this player from getting on the ball and making the game for them. So you can see how tight this circle really demonstrates how tight our group can be centrally defending. The weakness of the diamond is right in the middle of it. If they put an opponent in there, who then goes to pick it up? Does a 6 track them in? Does an 8 tuck inside? Does a 10 drop back? So for that is where the diamond has a weakness. It also will become weak if we deploy players outside. So sometimes you'll hear coaches say that I play in a 4-4-2 diamond, but I have a 7 and an 11. If you play with a 7 and an 11, you're really not in a diamond, because those 7 and 11s, you're probably asking to provide width in the team. And the diamond, the strength of it is that it stays a diamond, and it's 4 central midfield type players playing in a diamond in here. So the flank is going to be where we're going to have a challenge for us, because we really only have 1.5 players. The 9s will be outside, but it's very difficult. There may come a time when an 8 has to be deployed out to slow the attack down. Or we will have to be comfortable with leaving their left back on the ball. There might come a time in the game where we would leave their left back on the ball. It might probably be back in this space, but there might come a time where we don't go and press the ball. We just leave that player on the ball. Perhaps you scouted a player and you know that maybe the left back is right-footed, and now you want to push them wide instead of inside. So now pressure would be coming from inside rather than out, trying to put them onto their weak foot. And now it's not a rush to get them under any kind of pressure. So you can now see this space is going to be occupied. This shared space is occupied by our 2 9s as well as our 2 wide backs. So our 2 twin strikers have split apart, picking up the fullbacks, where our 2s and our 3s, our right and left backs, are now going to be helping deal with these 2 spaces as well. So as the 2 9s have helped with the 2 fullbacks, we now leave the 2 center backs on the ball. But because we now probably outnumber you centrally, with our 4 players here in our diamond, playing against your 3 players, we now will leave your 2 center backs on the ball and ask them to make the game for you. What usually happens is they look to spray balls long that we now have all the areas covered, or they bring the ball on the dribble into midfield, which is where we want them to bring the ball, allowing our 10 to perhaps go to press and steer the attack, or just go and confront. Asking the 2 center backs to be playmakers is a challenge for most opponents, even at the highest level.
The positioning of the 9s to take away the fullbacks is important. I think, though, it's important that they don't get too close to the fullbacks too soon, because you can see how that pass would be a devastating pass. And so the challenge for the two strikers, because they are defending from high, is to deny the ball out to the fullbacks, but also to try to deny the penetrating pass diagonally. Because ideally, we want these opposing centre-backs to play the ball in here. That would be optimum for us. So the positioning of your 2 9s, we don't want them going out and marking the 2 and 3 of the opponent. We don't want them man marking here. We want them kind of teasing the opponent into trying to play that pass, or possibly that pass, but we can then step and intercept it. Because the diamond is a pretty sophisticated structure to try to dictate how we play the opponent.
Correct. As well as maybe even baiting a pass there by not just man marking this player and eliminating him. The other thing that happens with a 9 occasionally is sometimes this long diagonal ball, especially if it's played to the back foot, will allow a 9 to come and double the ball right here on the flank. So those two qualities are vital, but the starting position of the 9 isn't to man mark this player. It's to kind of help deal with all of these 3 players and maybe occasionally double a ball depending on the quality of the pass.
So, Paul, let's talk about some of the activities that you might introduce to teach the principles of play as it relates to defending in the 1-4-4-2.
So this activity starts where we have 3 players, and this would be a very good activity to have recovering defending as well as a player to slow them down. So as soon as the game is started, this player would have already started moving out to perhaps squeeze some space, allow the attackers to come at them. You'll see that the coach shouts out a number. They could hold up a color. These could be 3 different colors where now we're going to see a visual cue. So if a coach was standing over here holding up a color of a red, so this would be the red player, the blue player, and the green player, you could now see that now it's a visual cue, and they would start on the shout of a coach or on a visual cue. Once the game is started, it now becomes 1v1, perhaps with a recovering defender chasing back, allowing this player to go and slow the attack down, delay. They don't have to win the ball, and now they're waiting for the help of the cavalry. And I like to make this sound, the cavalry's coming. And that's what we really need to teach when we're defending, is to just slow the attack down. You don't have to go and win it. Because if you are beaten, then the attack gets accelerated quickly. So as you can see here, if this player advances with the ball and I just run wildly at her and she gets by me, she now is right at the goal by herself. So we want to slow the attack down and help and let our teammates come back and perhaps help ambush and double team the ball. You can start to see where now more players are being deployed, and now we're starting to get even closer to the game. So the ball has now been played and then dribbled forward in advance. We're now having a player come and close them down, and the covering player is trying to get behind and perhaps cut this player off and still provide help to deal with the player on the ball. One of the things that I'd like to emphasize the most is we really need an assistant referee right here to call offsides, even in training. So an injured player, a coach, a parent, try and put somebody out here to help call offside, to look to see if this player is going to be offside or not, depending on where this player is relative to the goal in the field and so on. But too many times players are not trained in training to be played offside, and our attacking players are just running into offside space, and in training they're not being taught the proper way. Recovering defender here wins the ball, you can see, and then the game goes at the goal. So we now have transition being played in the game. And then eventually the game can be built up to where it's 3 versus 1 into a 4 versus 3, trying to get recovering defenders back. So this game starts to look at players being deployed across. It's a changing the grid game. I really like this game. There's some little technical things that go on in here. These players are now given vital information to the 2 players up front, how they should try to cut out passes and where they should move to. Once the ball is now played, then the ball is going to try to be played across the grid. Obviously, they could just lump one over in the air. So one of the conditions we'll put on the game is that they can't play the ball in the air over the players. The challenge with this game is the Blues are now facing forward. They're facing this way, going to try to win the ball. And then when they turn, they are now going this way. So one of the ways that we can try and build on this game here, and I think it's in the next slide. If you can click the next slide. Yeah, so you can now start to see that this is the piece now. So now they're now facing the opposite direction that they were. So the Blues really don't have any direction they're going other than once it's in this space, they're defending this grid and vice versa. So we can add some wrinkles to the game. And David, can you click one more slide? Yeah, okay, so go back. I'll show what we can do here. So one of the wrinkles to this game is we can now put targets here, small goals here. We can even play it to a big goal here with a goalkeeper in the goal. So now when the Blues win the ball, they're being rewarded by going directly to the goal, directly to a big goal in this space. When the game gets out and they have to recycle themselves, they then can now go at this goal that would have small goals here and perhaps a big goal down here. And then it's just trying to get us to press the ball and win the ball and go forward when we win it. We need to try and keep counterattacking in as much of the session as we possibly can, real to the game. Now we start to see a little more phase play, layers of players playing against each other. And now you can start to see that we're now really looking at how are we going to deal with this player on the ball. And that's the challenge in the game. Our 9 is now not tracking this player. They're not in the game. Do we deploy the 3 forward to get them? You can see that we've picked up other players. We have an extra player here that we'll need to deal with. Does this player now go out to get them? What I would do is I would set up the players and I would just watch and see if their movements are real to the game. What I mean by that is I'd roll the ball out. I'd let them start to play. And if this 8 keeps going out here to pick this player up, I know that that's not real to the game of what I'm going to ask this 8 to do during the game. We're going to ask this 8 to stay in here, and we're going to ask the 9 to drop off or the 3 to step up and pick up this player. And again, this is going to be shared space out on the flank. When the Blues win the ball, they can try and put the ball in any of the 3 goals. So you can see here, our 6 has cut the ball out, immediately played into the 8, who's counterattacked into the goal. This allows for the game to have free flow until the ball is played out of bounds or into one of the goals, either the big goal or the 3 counterattack goals. You can see here where we're asking that 8 to get a little bit higher in the team to stop the ball from being changed. You can also see here that this happens a lot in the game where our outside weak fullback might just be dropped off to balance the team, but really isn't defending against anyone. So this player could actually be perhaps into this position here rather than so deep.
Thanks, Paul. So let's now finish off with some concluding comments as it relates to the attacking and defending side of the ball.
So the shape allows us to play directly or indirectly because we outnumber opponents for most part centrally. I mean, even if you play in a 3-5-2, you probably don't have 5 central midfield players. You probably only have 3 with 2 wide midfield players. It allows us to play directly because we have many layers of players to play through. And 2 striking targets are 2 9s to play directly to from our backs or even our goalkeeper. It allows us to play indirectly because we have back players, a 6 kind of in that tweener space. We have 2 8s that are in the half spaces. And then we have a 10 and 2 9s in front of them. So our positioning of our players is allowing us to move the ball indirectly up the field as well as directly. The width is provided by many different players. Of course, our 2 wide players, the 2 fullbacks, but who will then pick up an 8 that drifts out there, a 9 that goes out there, a 9 that is starting outside but moving inside, or a 10 who goes wide. So we have players moving from central areas wide and players moving from wide areas centrally. It could create a real problem to see who they pick up. It also will allow, perhaps because we're narrow in midfield and could be narrow in the final third of the field, it might then allow us to play through the opponent in the half spaces as long as our fullbacks have engaged that space. Can you go back 1 slide or 2 slides quickly, just so I can show that? So one of the issues that we have in these half spaces, so the half space is really the space in between the 18 area, this area here. This is the half space. So as the red team is coming at the blue team, so I'll just put the half space back in. So as the red team is now attacking, if they can get a player in this space They'll need to have a player overlapping in this space. Otherwise, our fullback can step in and pick up that space. With an outside player overlapping, it'll keep our fullback in this space. We will do the same thing to them by having our fullbacks overlap, now allowing us to get into the half space with our 8 in this space, allowing them to play into there. And that goes back to why I put in that diamond activity passing with no pressure. I put those goals outside for the 8s to learn to try to look into that space from being in a half space. Okay, can you go back to the next 2 slides? Great. Because we outnumber the opponents centrally in the middle of the field, we also outnumber them centrally all the way down the field. So most teams now are playing with 1 striker. We have 2 center backs. We play with 3 central players. We play with 4. We play with 2 center backs. We play with 2 strikers. So we have 8 players, but now you outnumber us on the flank, which means that we have to now keep the ball wide when it gets wide. We can't allow the ball to come back in centrally, because if you change the point of attack on us with a big ball, we now might be unlocked on the weak side. The combinations between the 2 strikers, that's 2 against 2 against your 2 center backs. Our 2 9s play against your 2 center backs as we get closer to the goal. In build-up play, it might be our 2 9s are playing against your 2 center backs in a half a field, 2 against 2. If we're very athletic up front, that might cause your 2 center backs to have a massive problem to deal with. The mobility in midfield with having our 10 and our 8s running into spaces behind the back line will give you a new problem that now you'll either have to track us or you'll have to pass players on. And that moment of indecision might allow us to have a decisive moment to get in behind you. And the spacing of the 6 and the 10, those positions are starting positions are in between your layers of players usually, where our 2 strikers and our 2 8s, we have a player in between that space, and our 2 8s and our 2 center backs, we have a player in that space. It'll be very difficult for you to account for both the 10, the 2 8s, and the 6, unless you decide to just man mark us.
Ian, any concluding comments on any of the aspects of the attacking side of the ball?
Sure. The one thing that really occurs to me through the entire presentation is that as coaches, we can all come up with numbers that add up to 11. So 1, 4, 4, 2. But what Paul's really demonstrated clearly is the importance of the 4 in the midfield. Instead of being flat, maybe a 7, 11, a 6 and an 8, or maybe in a box where there's kind of a defensive box, he's gone with this notion of a diamond. And so consequently, it's a real sophistication. So the formation becomes a system based on the configuration, in this case, critically, of that 4-player midfield. And so both on the attacking side and the defending side, I think it's really important that our coaches understand it's not enough just to say these numbers, it's to explain how they are configured based on the player personnel or based on the coach's preference. And I think that's come out really clearly so far in the presentation.
You know, Ian, one of the things that when we start to talk about that, and now we've really gone into numbering the players, for me, I would play this system based on the qualities that I have. So if I really only had 1 holding midfield player, I had 2 box-to-box type midfield players, I may only have 1 creative 10 type player, and I have 2 strikers. This system's made for me. Especially if I don't have wingers. But as soon as I would say that I'm going to play within a 7, I still could play in a 4-4-2 with a 7. I won't be in a diamond, but I might have 3 central midfield players. I could play with 2 6s, a 10, and a 7. And that means I'm playing a little bit unbalanced with a left-sided player or a right-sided player, depending on where I played the 7 or the 11. And then I would have an attacking midfield player, maybe even an 8 that's a box-to-box player, and then a holding player. And then I would still play with 2 9s up front. So I'm designing this shape based on the qualities of the players that I have, mostly in attack, and sometimes just their personality. You know, you want to play a player wide, but their personality and tendency wants to be a central player, so they drift centrally anyway. I probably would start them in their tendencies and try and encourage them to expand their tendencies, but pretty much all players do have tendencies. Some will drift to the back, some will drift wide, some will drift centrally, some will drift up front. So as I mentioned earlier, we are really trying to protect the center of the field. So we're having 8 players. If you drew a line, maybe 30 yards wide on each side, so maybe 5 to 10 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards outside the circle, all the way down towards the 6s, so a space in between the 6 and the 18. We're protecting that space most of the time. The space where we're going to be exposed is mostly on the weak side, which in a young players, they might not be able to play a ball over 40 or 50 yards to unlock us and take advantage of the weakness that the system has. By the strikers splitting, we're trying to cancel out your fullbacks from receiving, and we're encouraging your 4 and your 5 to be the build-up play and to be the playmakers in the game, which then allows us to now try and press you with our 10 to try and cut passes out and encourage you to maybe pass a ball that you're not ready to, or we wrong-footed you, you're a right-footed player, and our 10 was able to get the ball onto your left foot, and now your range of passing isn't the same with your left foot as it is with your right foot. By the strikers picking up the fullbacks, it also helps keep our team compact horizontally across the field, and it allows us to then counter you with our 8s, our 10, and our 9s joining late. I can't stress the 9s joining late enough, because they're now running from wide positions centrally, either onto the ball or with the ball. And then the 4 central midfield players, well, we outnumber you and we can still support play. So most opponents do not play with 4 central midfielders unless you're matching our system. So because you're only playing with 3 or 2, you're going to have a harder time dealing with us, and we're going to be able to really press your midfield players, taking away some of your special players perhaps.
Ian, any concluding comments as it relates to defending?
Yeah, I'm really happy with Paul's emphasis about the importance of the number 9s, setting up a lot of the defending features of the 4-4-2 with the diamond midfield. I think one important thing to stress to our youth coaches and for them to stress to their players is when we don't have the ball, every player on our team is a potential defender. And when, of course, we have the ball, every player is a potential attacker. But in the case of not having it, the number 9s, they may not be the guys that can make the game-winning tackle, and they're really robust technical defenders. But certainly the way they shape and the way they work can set up the defending for the rest of the team. And so this notion of when we don't have the ball, we are all defenders in some capacity, even our number 9s, I think is really worth emphasizing, especially at youth level.
Yeah, and especially when you go back and you watch the Portugal in the Euros, especially, and obviously they won, they were very good. And Nani and Ronaldo are 2 guys that you might say, well, they're so good attacking, we don't need them to defend much. Those are 2 of, Ronaldo perhaps one of the best in the world, Nani very good when he was in form. And they both are now picking up fullbacks, defending deep, tracking players. Obviously, the more important the game was, you see that the more ground, especially the elite level players. If it was a friendly, I don't know how much tracking they would have done, but because the games mattered to them and they were trying to compete in a tournament to win the Euros, they're covering a tremendous amount of ground, not just attacking, but defending as well.
Well, thank you, Paul Marco, for your time today. An excellent presentation, and rounds out the 11 versus 11 formations and systems presentations as it relates to the 4 systems that we decided to present. The 1-4-3-3, the 1-3-5-2, the 1-4-4-2, and the 1-4-5-1. Thanks very much, Paul, and thanks, Ian Barker.
Thank you.